Welcome, everyone, and a very specific welcome to you, the listener, for joining us on this custom-tailored journey today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So today is March 6th, 2026, and we are stepping into a sonic landscape that has just undergone this massive tectonic shift.
A total structural realignment.
Exactly. We're looking at the absolute current state and really the structural future of one of the most physically imposing musical movements of our lifetime. If you are someone who appreciates understanding not just what you're hearing through a rig, but, the deep cultural mechanics and the sound design evolution behind it, you are in exactly the right place.
It's good to be here. And I have to say, the source material you brought us today is it's a fascinating curio.
Right.
It's incredibly brief. It reads essentially as a dispatch, like a coded transmission from the very frontier of electronic music architecture.
Yeah.
It doesn't waste a single syllable on exposition.
It really doesn't. It is literally stripped down to the bone.
Yeah.
So today's deep dive is based on a highly concentrated, incredibly short text. It's titled Dubstep Story E05 Future.md. And it's officially credited to 2026-786 Music LLC. When I first parsed this document, it honestly struck me as an internal memo for an entire industry.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's just a handful of declarative sentences.
Right.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically forensically unpack this brief text.
We have to. Every word counts.
We need to decode the newly established or maybe newly solidified terminology of the genre. We're going to explore its geographical strongholds as they stand today in 2026. And critically, we're going to pair you for a rather massive spatial leap in audio engineering.
Treating this document as a definitive artifact gives us the runway to thoroughly analyze the implications of its syntax. Because, every word in this dispatch carries a decade of historical baggage.
Yeah.
And technical evolution.
Okay, let's unpack this. Just looking at the very first part of this text, we have the phrase, Episode 5, The Future 2026, Split Permanent. It is entirely declarative. It doesn't suggest the genre is currently blending or going through a phase of cross-pollination. It states point blank, split permanent.
What's fascinating here is how this text functions as a definitive historical marker for a culture that has, over the last 15 years, completely fractured.
Right.
In electronic music history, we often see genres splinter into subgenres. Think of the early 90s hardcore continuum fracturing into jungle, drum and bass, UK garage.
Oh, definitely.
But usually they maintain a sort of permeable membrane. Producers share sample packs, artists cross-pollinate on festival lineup.
Audiences mingle at the same shows.
Exactly. But the phrase split permanent implies a point of full allopatric speciation. A point of no return.
But I have to ask, in a decentralized, hyper-connected digital era where every producer on Earth has access to the exact same DAWs, the same splice libraries, the same VSTs, is a truly permanent split even realistic? Or is this dispatch just being a bit dramatic for the sake of planting a flag in the ground?
That's a fair critique. But I would argue it's less about the literal isolation of the tools and entirely about the divergence of structural intent.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's the physical environments that have permanently split. You have the North American stadium and massive festival circuit on one side that demands a highly aggressive maximalist frequency spectrum to translate across open air to, say, 50,000 people.
Right, big line arrays.
Yes. And on the other side, you have the localized, dark, low-ceiling club environment. That relies entirely on acoustic pressure and negative space. Over time, producers optimize their mixdowns for one environment or the other.
Right.
Eventually, the acoustic requirements of those two spaces become so incompatible that a track built for one simply fails in the other. The membrane becomes impermeable. The split becomes permanent.
Okay, that structural divergence leads us perfectly into how the source defines the first side of that schism. The text provides what looks like a cultural mathematical equation.
Right. Brostep Riddim.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brostep Riddim. No spaces, just an equal sign bridging these two terms.
It's a linguistic override. If we analyze the why behind this equation, we see the brutal efficiency with which underground culture eventually consolidates its own terminology.
Yeah.
The subgenre that was once colloquially and heavily controversially known as Brostep throughout the 2010s has now, by the year 2026, been completely consumed by and equated to Riddim.
Let's dig into the sound design of that transition, because Brostep originally was characterized by that chaotic FM synthesis, the aggressive mid-range screeches, the constantly mutating LFO rate.
The hyperactive, jagged arrangement.
Yes. It was incredibly complex, almost to the point of sounding like a malfunctioning dial-up modem run through a distortion pedal. But Riddim is entirely different mechanically, isn't it?
Precisely. Riddim is the distillation of that aggression into a widget quarter-note stomp. It stripped away the chaotic FM synthesis variations. It focused entirely on repetitive, comb-filtered, metallic clanks.
Super mechanical.
Highly mechanical. Utilizing heavily processed delay tails and phasers to create a churning, industrial rhythm. It favors a bouncing triplet feel groove rather than the erratic unpredictability of early 2010s mid-range bass.
So what does this all mean for the culture? I mean, by stating Brostep Riddim 786 Music LLC is essentially saying the evolutionary transition is complete. The scene has shed its legacy baggage.
Completely.
The complex, chaotic arrangements of the past have been fully overwritten by the militaristic, repetitive stomp of the present. The debate over nomenclature is dead. On this side of the evolutionary fork, the sound has accepted its final form.
And it also indicates that the audience has accepted it. Language shifts when the collective consciousness of the dance floor decides it shifts.
Right.
The equal sign in that text is doing an immense amount of heavy lifting. It's a formal decree that the transition phase is over.
Which brings us across the chasm to the other side of this evolutionary fork. If the festival side of the genre has consolidated into Riddim, the source text gives us a very specific status update on the foundational side. It says, deep dubstep, thriving UK.
It's a striking juxtaposition. On one side, an equation of aggressive subgenres settling into a rigid new identity. On the other side, the text specifically notes that the deep variant is not merely surviving on the fringes, but actively thriving in a very localized ecosystem.
The geographical anchor is what really catches my eye here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we live in a world where a producer in Tokyo can collaborate in real time with a vocalist in São Paulo, right? And drop the track on a global streaming platform 5 minutes later. Music is arguably entirely borderless today.
True.
And yet this massive influential movement still fundamentally relies on a geographic anchor. Why is the UK still the mandatory epicenter for this specific sound to thrive? Why couldn't this variant thrive purely on global Discord servers?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it illustrates a profound truth about acoustics and physical reality.
Yeah.
Streaming algorithms inherently favor mid-range frequencies because the vast majority of music is consumed on mobile phone speakers, earbuds, basic car stereos.
Sure.
But deep dubstep is fundamentally reliant on sub-bass frequencies, specifically in that 30 to 40 hertz range.
Frequencies that you literally cannot hear on a laptop.
Exactly. You don't just hear some 5 hertz. You feel it.
Yeah.
It requires massive physical displacement of air. It requires custom-built sound systems with dedicated 18-inch or 21-inch subwoofer cones moving serious volume.
It's a whole physical infrastructure.
Exactly. The UK scene isn't just a location, it's a brick-and-mortar infrastructure. It's the specific tuning of legacy rigs in particular venues. It's a culture that still highly values the physical dubplate and the communal experience of standing in front of a wall of speakers.
Wow.
That level of acoustic pressure cannot be digitized or simulated in a pair of Bluetooth headphones. Therefore, the genre must remain geographically anchored to the places where that physical infrastructure is maintained.
It's almost an act of rebellion against the algorithmic flattening of music. The genre requires a pilgrimage to a physical space, which brings us to the rhythmic core of that physical space. The source gives us the immutable baseline of this thriving culture. It reads, 140 BPM halftime eternal.
The word eternal carries significant weight there.
I know, right?
In music criticism, to label a tempo as eternal is a very bold claim.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that specific syncopation. Because for anyone who spends time analyzing underground bass music, you know that the 140 halftime signature is what creates the entire atmosphere. The underlying grid is vibrating at a rapid 140 beats per minute, which is mathematically highly divisible, great for programming rapid hi-hats or percussive top loops. But the skeletal structure, the actual groove, relies on the snare drum hitting on beat 3.
Yes, the halftime placement of the snare is the structural pillar of the genre.
It creates this massive cavernous pocket of empty audio space between the transients. Instead of cluttering the mix with a four-to-the-floor kick pattern, that halftime syncopation stretches the tension. It gives those massive rolling sub-bass frequencies the physical room they need to breathe and mutate without phase canceling against the drums.
And by declaring it eternal, the dispatch is canonizing that specific rhythmic tension. as a foundational cadence. It is the immutable law of physics for this side of the split.
Right.
If a producer pushes the tempo to 160 or 170 BPM, the physical groove changes entirely. The music morphs into footwork or jungle.
Yeah.
If they pull it down to 120, it becomes a variant of bass house. The 1 VPM halftime marker is the exact resonant frequency of this specific cultural movement.
But is it a limitation? I mean, if you are a producer and you are told that the 140 halftime grid is an eternal boundary you cannot cross, does that stifle innovation, or does it actually force deeper creativity within those constraints?
I'd argue it's the latter. Constraint breeds innovation. When the rhythmic bass line is locked, producers can't rely on tempo shifts to create energy. They are forced to innovate entirely within the realms of texture, sound design, spatial placement, and negative space. The tempo floor is a constant, which means the variables above it have to work harder.
Which perfectly sets up the final and undoubtedly most technically disruptive piece of information in the dispatch. If the tempo floor is locked, the way producers manipulate the textures above it is about to undergo a radical transformation. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The final revelation from the dubstep story E05 Future.md text reads, "Spatial audio wobbles coming."
This raises an important question about the intersection of low-frequency physics and emerging club technology. Up until this point, electronic music has largely been confined to a two-dimensional stereo matrix.
Right. We spent decades engineering low-frequency oscillators, the LFOs that create that signature, mutating wobble bass, to maximize their impact across two left and right channels.
Okay.
A producer might use sophisticated mid-side EQing to keep the sub-bass perfectly mono while panning the higher harmonics of the wobble slightly left and right to make it feel wide. But it still fundamentally exists on a flat plane in front of the listener.
But spatial audio wobbles coming indicates a fundamental shift in the venue hardware and the producer's digital audio workstation. We are talking about object-based mixing, moving from the cinema into the underground club space.
That's huge.
Technologies like Dolby Atmos or advanced wavefield synthesis matrices allow a producer to decouple a sound from a specific speaker channel. Instead, the wobble becomes an audio object that can be mapped to XYZ coordinates within the physical room.
Think about the technical implications of that for a producer. You aren't just automating a low-pass filter cutoff or a wavetable position anymore. You are simultaneously automating the azimuth and elevation of the sound object itself.
It's wild.
Imagine locking into that eternal 140 halftime groove, and the sub-bass doesn't just rumble from the front of the room. A specific, aggressive mid-bass modulation is programmed to physically start at the back left corner of the ceiling, spiral down through the crowd, and disperse into the floor right on the snare transient.
It's an immense technical challenge, frankly, because low-frequency sound waves are inherently omnidirectional. A 40 hertz wave is incredibly long. It wraps around physical objects and pressurizes the entire room.
Right, you can't really aim it easily.
Exactly. To effectively spatialize a wobble requires not just steering the higher directional harmonics of the bass patch, but potentially utilizing massive arrays of transducers beneath the dance floor to provide tactile, localized feedback that matches the spatial movement of the mid-range frequencies above.
It's a structural pivot that forces us to reconsider how producers arrange their mixdowns entirely. If you have true spatial audio in a club, you no longer have to brutally EQ elements to carve out room in a crowded stereo field.
Not at all.
You can literally just move an element 3 feet to the left in three-dimensional space to unmask it.
Exactly. And returning to the text, this is why the split permanent was inevitable. The festival side, the Riddim side, relies on a wall of sound. It relies on a dense, impenetrable block of compressed audio hitting the crowd all at once from a front-facing line array.
Right.
But the deep side, the UK side, thrives on space. It thrives on minimalism and acoustic pressure. Spatial audio is the ultimate realization of that philosophy. It takes the empty space between those 140 BPM halftime drum hits and turns it into an architectural playground.
The wobble isn't just a sound wave oscillating on a screen anymore. It becomes a physical entity in the room with you. It transforms the experience from a passive auditory event into an active tactile immersion.
And that completely recontextualizes the entire dispatch.
Yeah.
The genre is split permanently because the two sides are exploring completely different acoustic goals.
Yes.
One seeks maximum impact through aggressive frontal compression. The other, anchored in its legacy infrastructure and chained to its eternal rhythmic cadence, is looking toward a technological horizon that will alter how human bodies interact with the physical movement of sound.
It is a profound evolution. So let's synthesize what we've uncovered from this highly concentrated dispatch. We started with just a handful of words, but look at the depth of the industry landscape they outline.
It's dense.
We've examined the split permanent and evolutionary point of allopatric speciation, where the acoustic requirements of the festival and the club have forced the genre into two irreconcilable paths. We've decoded the cultural overwrite of the year 2026, where the complex chaos of Brostep has been fully distilled and universally accepted as the mechanical stomp of Riddim.
We've also established that despite the borderless nature of digital production, the physics of low-end frequencies mandate that deep dubstep requires a localized physical infrastructure, firmly keeping its roots thriving in the UK sound system culture.
We analyzed the mathematical constraints of that deep sound, the 140 BPM halftime rhythm. It is not just a stylistic choice, it is an eternal foundational cadence that creates the necessary negative space for the sub-bass to operate. And finally, we looked to the immediate technological horizon. Spatial audio is about to revolutionize the signature bass wobble, taking the LFOs off the flat 2D stereo matrix and unleashing them as three-dimensional objects programmed into the XYZ coordinates of the club space.
It is a remarkable amount of structural insight compressed into a single brief artifact. It reads less like an observation and more like a blueprint for the next decade of sound engineering.
It really does. And I want to remind you that all of these deep architectural and historical insights came directly from the specific parameters laid out in the source material you provided, the document titled Dubstep Story E05 Future.md, officially credited to A2026 786 Music LLC. It's truly compelling how much you can extrapolate about the future of music production when you take the time to critically analyze the texts that document our shifting cultural baselines.
I'd like to leave you with one final thought to mull over before we conclude today's analysis. We've talked extensively about the technical challenges of moving from stereo to spatial audio matrices and how producers will automate those iconic wobbles to move freely in three-dimensional space around the room.
Yeah.
But let's take that one step further into the psychology of the listener.
Okay.
If the bass can be programmed to occupy specific physical coordinates, dynamically moving around and through the crowd, the music stops being something you merely face towards. It entirely becomes a physical architectural environment that you inhabit.
Wow.
When the low-frequency oscillation isn't just a sound, but a tactile wall you can stand next to, or a ceiling of bass pressing down on you from above. How will you prepare yourself to literally step inside the wobble?
That is an incredible visual and a massive conceptual shift to chew on. The producer becomes an architect. Thank you so much for bringing such a provocative and dense artifact to the table today. We've unpacked the historical split, we've analyzed the linguistic override of the culture, we've found the mathematical cadence that anchors it, and we've looked deeply into the spatial future of its sound design. Until next time, stay curious, keep your ears open, and enjoy stepping into the future.